Hello viewers, as you know if you follow my channel, I occasionally like to talk about my background as a former Jehovah's Witness, but it's always nice to hear the perspective of others who were raised in the witness faith. My guest today is just such a person. It is none other than Nathan Quarry, a former Jehovah's Witness and I believe retired MMA fighter. Is that right, Nathan?
That is correct. I've been punched in the face enough for this lifetime.
You told me last time we met in person, you told me some real horror stories that that had me. I can't believe your body has been put through that, but you're all in one piece now, I see. So that's the main thing.
I am. There's a lot of screws holding me together, but it's all good.
Excellent. So let's start at the top, shall we? How did you get involved with Jehovah's Witnesses?
I was born a witness. My father, kind of going back, and I think so often it kind of follows this pattern where my grandfather was very physically, emotionally, mentally abusive to my father. It actually came down to a point where he was given the option by the judge to either join the military or go to jail. So he joined the Navy. While in the Navy someplace, he met my mother. They ended up getting married. He was stationed over in Italy, and the witnesses called on my mother while he was out doing his military thing. And so she started having a book study with them. And every time that they would move, my father would get stationed someplace else. My mother would then go to the local congregation, continue on the study, and eventually my father got swayed into it as well. So when he left the Navy, then they just became full-time Jehovah's Witnesses. So my oldest brother and sister, and my other sister, I guess, the age differences, my oldest sister's 10 years older, brother's 9 years older, other sister's 6 years older. They were all born in the world and then converted, so they lost all the holidays. I was born into it as a witness in 1970.
Look at you.
I've never known anything different except when I chose to leave myself.
Wow. So, I mean, you have quite a heartbreaking story that relates to shunning, which a lot of my viewers and indeed myself are familiar with, the way that the organization and indeed your close ones can suddenly turn on you. It
may be heartbreaking, but it's also common.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not alone in this, and it's just something and especially growing up a witness, this is all that you know, so this is normal to you. And it took me a long time. I was well into my 30s when I started going to therapy to kind of figure out why I am the way I am, why I react the way I do, why I kept getting into bad relationships, these types of things. And the therapist told me, well, you were abused as a child. So for you, this is just normal. For you, with love comes pain. And she said, well, we need to talk about when you were disfellowshipped when you were 19 years old. And I looked at her and I said, there's nothing to talk about. I've dealt with that. It's all good. And she just kind of shook her head and said, you have no idea. You have PTSD from your childhood and from all these things. And I looked at her and I said, are you kidding me? I wasn't a soldier. I haven't been shot at or anything like that. And she said, that's not all that PTSD is about. And of course, I said what every abuse victim says, well, I didn't have it that bad. And she looked at me and said, well, if I knew you back then, I would have had you taken out of the house. And it was such an eye-opening, shocking thing for me to hear, to have someone say, no, you were abused as a child. No, these things are not normal. Parents, under normal circumstances, would never cast their child out into the world or away from their home and family. It's just not normal. And for the first time in my life, to have somebody tell me, you're not the bad kid that you were told you were, I broke down crying. And I had a vision of myself being that little 7-8-year-old kid, just terrified of the world and terrified of every mistake that I made, and me as an adult getting down and hugging myself and saying, it's okay, it's not your fault. Sure. And it was this huge relief It was like this backpack of weight and guilt finally came off of my shoulders.
Wow, I can imagine. So, would it be possible to ask you how you managed to get yourself disfellowshipped at 19?
Of course. Boy, long story short, I guess the answer would be hand jobs.
Okay.
What the elders call uncleanness.
Right.
Of course, at 19 to 25, right in that range, your hormones.
You were in a relationship basically that had a sexual element to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was dating a worldly girl.
Right.
Trying to get her to come to meetings, and of course, being 19 years old with this beautiful young lady as well, it was every moment you get, you want to have your hands all over each other, and you're resisting these sinful urges so much. When I went to the elders and said, well, can I study with her? Can I bring her to the meetings? They just pounced on me. Well, have you been doing anything with her alone? Have you done anything? Have you touched each other? Have you done any of these things? And of course, lying is a sin, and I'm not much of a liar anyways. So I just said, yes, we have done these things. And I could almost see this look in their eyes that said, oh, we've got him. Because I had moved from the congregation that I grew up in to a congregation on the south end of town. And so now I was this 19-year-old stud cruising into their congregation to meet ladies and just party. They didn't see me as another brother that came to their congregation. And in fact, I remember one of the meetings where they actually said how the family is the backbone of the congregation. And the way that they stated it just made it seem like it made you feel like if you weren't married, if you weren't in a relationship, then why are you even here? You're just a detriment to everyone else because you're still chasing these sinful desires type of thing instead of finally getting married and becoming a pioneer and all that good stuff.
Sure. So at 19, you find yourself ejected from a religion that you assume to be God's one and only truth. Where'd you go from there?
Well, now as an adult at 46, when I look back on that time span, I describe it as the worst self-imposed time of my life. Because at 19, being that was all that I ever knew, now it was God had cast me out of his organization. I was the bad grape in the group of grapes, a bunch of grapes. And if I was allowed to stay, I would rot the congregation. So God cast me out. I lost every friend I'd ever had. I lost my family. I lost my congregation. I even was fired because I worked for a Jehovah's Witness.
Okay, yeah. So
I went from an active social life as a 19-year-old to day after day of nothing, and especially being unemployed, just sitting at home alone with nothing to do, no one to talk to, and it nearly drove me insane to the point where I was self-harming. I showed up on my parents' doorstep at 2 a.m., just hoping that they hadn't changed the locks and would let me back into the house. And they found me in the living room just in a ball crying. And they allowed me to stay with them for a few weeks. There was a discussion because my parents had the book study at their house, whether or not I would be allowed to stay there because they would have to then move the book study. You can't have a book study in the house with a disfellowshipped person there. But my dad said, well, I'm not going to send him away in this state. And they could see I'd been burning myself, trying to punish myself, torture myself for my sins. It took me a month or so to kind of get my mind cleared. I got another job, so I had some more things to keep me busy instead of just sitting around all day talking about what a poor sinner I was. And then moved back out alone into my little studio apartment. Got reinstated. I think it was around 7 months out. And at around the 6-month mark, I started applying for reinstatement. And they kept putting me off. They'd say, oh, yeah, we'll meet with you Thursday. Thursday would come. Oh, sorry, we can't meet with you. Maybe next Tuesday. Well, next Tuesday would come. Well, we can't meet with you.
And just so people understand, Nate, because I think this is there's a side of reinstatement that people perhaps don't think of. Talk us through the process of going to the meetings, which is part of the reinstatement process, and basically have an entire congregation shun you.
Yeah, so you have to show that you're humble enough to accept God's lessons, what he needs to teach you. So you have to continue going to meetings. So I went to every single meeting, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and I would sit there alone in the back of the hall, and no one would talk to you. I think, in fact, only one time someone spoke to me, and it was the elder at the book study who called on me. He said, well, we have a brother here that I don't recognize. What was your name? And I just had to look at him and say, I'm disfellowshipped. He just went, oh, okay. And then just continued ignoring me for the rest of the meeting. So after going to these meetings for months on end with no communication whatsoever, then you have to write a letter saying, I wish to be reinstated into the congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses. I confess my sins. I'm so sorry for all the horrible things that I've done. And then the group of elders, the 3 elders that met with me, they would read this letter, pray about it amongst themselves, and then figure out whether or not they felt that I was worthy to even meet with them, and then apply for my reinstatement. And after they had kind of dragged this on, and again, I'm still 100% believer at this time. So every day that I'm out, and I'm having horrific nightmares every single night, and which went on for another 10 years as well. Armageddon came. The sky was black, although I could see as if it was daylight. And I was laying there on the ground, reaching out to my family. And it was taken right out of the young, not the young people aspect, my book of Bible stories. There was a painting in one of those where someone was laying down, reaching out for Jehovah's salvation, and the family was just ignoring her. Well, you made your decision. And that was the nightmare I had every single night. So after they kept putting me off for several weeks, there was a convention coming up, a 3 or 4 day convention where 10,000 witnesses all show up together. And I just went to the elders, and the next time they said, no, we're going to delay your meeting. I looked at them, and I remember exactly what I said. Please, brother, with all humility, this is killing me. Can you please show some compassion and meet with me as soon as possible? This is really killing me. This is really hard. And I was fighting back the tears at the time. And again, the brother just looked at me like, oh, so you don't want to wait on God's chosen elders to decide when you can meet with us. So the next meeting when I saw him, he came up to me and he said, well, I talked to the other elders, and we've decided because you asked us to hurry up with your meeting with us, you haven't learned humility yet. And we like to bring people back in before a big convention so they can get the fellowship with their brothers and sisters, but you need to be humbled a little bit more, so we're going to wait until after the convention. So I went to the convention every day of it, drove by myself, sat by myself, ate lunch by myself, to once again show my humility, to making sure these elders knew that I know I'm just a worthless sinner and they're completely right, and everything I've ever wanted is just sinful, baseless desires. Yeah, and then after the convention, then they finally met with me, prayed about it, and then reinstated me shortly after that, and then I was once again approved to be in God's chosen organization.
Wow. So you're back inside. You are fully believing, but you've kind of been through the ringer a bit. You've seen the ugly, more unloving side of the organization, which is something not everyone gets to see. Not everyone gets to see the organization from the perspective of a disfellowshipped person. So again, because obviously you're no longer a witness now, so you must have got ejected from the organization again. How did that come about?
I'm a 2-time loser. God hated me so much he kicked me out of his organization twice. What almost, I don't want to say backfired, but what really opened my eyes was once I was disfellowshipped, then I went out and I got a job at a worldly company. And so now I was working around worldly people and realizing, these aren't as evil a people as I was always told. And what really backfired on them was one of the days when I was disfellowshipped and didn't have a job. I was just wandering around the town, just walking around, and I come across the comic book store. And I said to myself, well, I used to read comic books all the time as a kid, and I kind of stopped through my teenage years. I'll go in and check it out. By the time I leave the comic book store, the owner was such a good salesman, I'd subscribed to 6 books. So now, and again, because I have nothing else to do, I'm going to this comic book store every single week, picking up my comics, talking to the owner. Well, the owner sells it to somebody else. And kind of now as years are starting to go by, just 2-3 years, the owner sells it a couple times, sells it another time. Finally, this other guy buys it. Jamie Hayes was his name. And he was just a couple years older than me. So I'm probably 22. He's 24. He's got his own business, a cool comic book store. He's always playing really cool, funky music, treating his customers like crap. It was almost like a Jay and Silent Bob type scenario. And I'd just go into his shop every Tuesday to pick up my books, and I'd hang out for an hour or two, and we kind of talk. And after a few months, he invited me to go out to a bar with him, and I would always make the excuse, oh, no, sorry, I'm just too busy. Oh, I don't have time, blah, 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 because, that's bad association. Not only hanging out with a worldly person, but then also going to a worldly bar. What if somebody saw me at this bar and knew that I was a witness?
And had you been reinstated by this point? Yeah.
Yes, I was still reinstated at this point. I was still going to all the meetings. But I was just becoming unhappy with things. And eventually I acquiesce and I go to this local bar with my friend Jamie. And at the bar, we have a couple beers. We talk about comic books. We talk about movies. After a couple hours, we shake hands and go home. And I go home and I'm like, wait a minute. So this had nothing to do with religion. He didn't offer me drugs. I'm not gay. I haven't converted to some demonistic other religion, anything like that. So is this really that bad? What are they trying to stop me from doing? So me and Jamie kept hanging out, and we'd go to a bar and we'd have a couple beers and talk comics and this and that. And then he invited me to his grandparents on a Sunday. He's like, oh, my grandparents put on this great Sunday dinner. You got to come with me. And I was like, wait a minute. So his grandparents are like big time Christians. I don't know if they were Catholic or regular, but whatever it was, they weren't Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, going to a worldly person's house for dinner that are known Christians that are not Jehovah's Witnesses, that was a whole other thing. And it took me quite a while. I put them off, and finally I said, okay, I'll go to dinner at your grandparents' house. And it was delightful. First off, I got the biggest steaks I'd ever seen, New York steaks. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. His grandfather, grandmother were just having this great banter back and forth. They were just a loving family where there was a lot of laughter. People weren't worried about every little slip of the tongue could be judged, looking at you as some possible sinner, whatever the case may be. And at the end of it, I remember going home and thinking to myself, so these are people that Jehovah wants to kill because they're not Jehovah's Witnesses. And all I saw was loving, friendly, kind-hearted people that would invite a stranger, a friend of their grandson's, to their house for dinner. So this is what I'm being taught. These are the people that Jehovah wants to kill. This just doesn't make sense to me. And it was from there that my eyes kind of started to get opened. And then there was a bunch of other witness kids that were kind of on the fence as well. And we'd have little, I don't know if I can call them parties, but get-togethers. And they'd hang out. And it was kind of your average 22-year-old kid party. Lots of drinking and watching whatever on TV and just having fun. Well, one of the guys comes up to me and goes, dude, there's these two guys on TV in a cage beating the hell out of each other. And I went, what? That just sounds ridiculous. In this day and age, who would do that? Because first off, I never even watched boxing. I thought it was too violent. Just why would somebody want to go through that, put yourselves through that, get a real job type of thing. Well, then I go inside and I see the very beginning of the UFC, the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and I see Royce Gracie and Ken Shamrock, two of the MMA legends in their very first fights. And what really amazed me was I was seeing skill, I was seeing athleticism, and at the end of the fight, they would stand up and hug each other and shake hands, and they would show respect to each other. And that just blew me away, and I thought, wait a minute, this isn't violence, this is sport. And then being 22, 23 years old and drinking at a party with some friends, we'd start wrestling around and pushing each other through doors and trying to figure out what they were doing in the UFC. And I said, all right, I want to see if I can do what they're doing. And I found a local gym in my hometown that was teaching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I started training there in secret. Because obviously you can't train martial arts and be a Jehovah's Witness. Not only is it all about violence, but it always has some kind of mystical, you're going to be worshiping Satan if you take karate or something like that. So I'm kind of training in secret, and now I'm opened up to a whole new group of people that are not Jehovah's Witnesses, that have other viewpoints, other ways of living. And it just so happened that another person joined the gym a couple weeks before me, who happened to have been raised a Jehovah's Witness as well. And his name was Robert Follis. And whereas I became a fighter, he became a coach. But we kind of met after training for a month or so, and I kept hearing about this guy. It's like, oh yeah, you'd really get along with him. He was raised a Jehovah's Witness too. You guys probably have a lot to talk about. And I could see that his point of view was so much further beyond what mine was. Because I still believed that Jehovah's Witnesses 100%, because I'd never made any effort to replace that information with anything else.
Well, you say 100%, but you'd already admitted that there were certain elements, such as the Armageddon teaching, that didn't really make sense to you. So you had kind of the beginnings of doubts there, didn't you, I guess?
Yeah. I'd say it was kind of some cracks that were starting as I was starting to question things, which I guess as soon as you're questioning things, Satan's already taken a hold of you. So I was done for. But Robert Follis, one day he says, man, this book really helped me kind of open my eyes to what the Jehovah's Witness organization is all about. And he went to hand me the book Crisis of Conscience. And I just raised my hands and I went, yeah, I can't read that. And he goes, let me guess, you believe that this book is inhabited by a demon, and if you touch it and take it into your house, then maybe your clothes, your house is going to be demonized as well. And I looked at him and I said, well, when you put it that way, it sounds kind of stupid, but yeah, that's what I believe because that's what I was taught. And he looked at me and he said, well, this book has had, 500,000 printings, some large number of printing. He says, I guarantee you there's not a demon hanging out in every single copy waiting for someone like you to pick it up. Plus, it's been in my house for several years now, so I'm sure the demons have already gotten out and they're all hanging out in my place now, so feel free to borrow it. And I did, and I started reading it, and I realized, oh my God, this is just a business. This isn't an ordained organization by any means. And thinking about the chapters where thinking about the governing body, the way that it was always explained was that the governing body, the 9, 10, 12 older men would sit around, the light from Jehovah would shine on them, the truth would get brighter, and then they would come to a new understanding of what the next stage of our witness evolution would be. Well, in reality, it's voting. And it was like 2/3 vote to pass any new bright light, which made no sense to me whatsoever. If you're praying and then God's light is upon you, wouldn't it be 100% every single time? You're telling me that bestiality isn't a disfellowshipping offense because it didn't get the votes the first time around? That these types of things just really started to open my eyes even more. So I got to the point where now it kind of got out around the town that I was training in martial arts. I was back dating someone again. It was a witness person this time, but yes, of course, there was going to be more physical contact type of thing. The elders kind of hunted me down, wanted to meet with me again, and I met with them, and I said, yes, I do regret the things that I've been doing. I still am a Jehovah's Witness. I still believe this. Because my timeline may be a little bit off here, but I still remember just saying, yeah, I wish things weren't this way. And,
yeah, it's a gradual process waking up, isn't it? So I can understand, it was,
Yes. And one Sunday morning, the elders stopped by my house to witness to me, and the girl I was seeing opened the door wearing my shirt. And they just said, oh, so you're not really serious about regretting the things you've been doing, and you really don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. And so then they kind of hounded me again to meet with them. And by this point, I was like, I'm not going to go sit down with 3 older men and have them tell me what a sinner I am and that God's going to kill me. It's like, if that's what's going to happen, that's what's going to happen. But I need to sit around and have you guys tell me that. And so I just stopped going to meeting. They disfellowshipped me when I wasn't there at the meeting, and just told my parents, I was like, well, I'm out again, and this time it's for good. So it is what it is.
Interesting, though, that they hunted you down. I think that's a side of elders that is really distasteful. I think it varies from congregation to congregation. I know I've been in congregations that are a little bit more laid back and less investigative when it comes to actually seeking out wrongdoing. But yeah, it sounds as though they were literally kind of chomping at the bit to hunt you down and do the deed.
Well, and I think too, it kind of depends on the person. I'm not quiet about my beliefs, things that I think are wrong, and so compare that to my brother. My brother's never been disfellowshipped. He's 55 this year, I believe. Drug user, fornicator, alcoholic, all of these things. But every time that the elders would meet with him, he would just start crying uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, I'm a sinner. I don't know why I'm this way. And they'd say, oh, you really show remorsefulness, and we forgive you. And he'd try to be a good witness for a couple months. Every time when I was young, every time he'd meet with the elders, then, oh my God, he was the most self-righteous for weeks after that. Nathan, did you pray tonight? You need to pray every night before you go to bed. Like 7. And he's at 16, something like that, getting in trouble with the elders. But me, I was very much, this doesn't make sense. I don't agree with this. I think the way that you're treating people is wrong. I think I even used the word hypocrite a few times in describing the elders. So as soon as you start telling the people in power that you disagree with the things that they're doing, or you consider them hypocrites, they take offense to that fairly quickly.
Indeed. So viewers, we've moved forward in time now because Nathan has had to reposition himself inside his beautiful home in Oregon. And so Nathan rejoins us. But I wanted to kind of bring us forward in time further because you obviously got disfellowshipped twice, as you say. I'm interested to know what impact your standing, your disfellowshipping, has had with your family over time. Because I know when we were last together, you shared some stories about kind of the way your mother has reacted, and you and I are both in a similar situation where we've raised children outside of the organization, and they to some extent are suffering because of what we've done or the decisions we've made. So talk to me a little bit about the impact that it's had long term.
Well, it's such a messed up situation where, so I recently got married in February. A couple times in the past few years of dating my now wife and spending time with her and her extended family, her grandmother or her great uncle will talk about the importance of family, or ohana, they're Hawaiians. And they'll give a long speech about where they've come from and how important this is and that you don't want to forget these things. And I'm sitting here listening to this, saying to myself, I've never heard anyone speak like this in my life. Because as a Jehovah's Witness family means nothing. It's all about the organization. So as soon as you decide you no longer want to be a witness, you're just cast out from the family. You're essentially dead to them. And when my sister was disfellowshipped, I think I was 13 or 14, I didn't see her for 14 years. It was just all of a sudden my dad said, yeah, Lori's been disfellowshipped. It is what it is.
Were you able to reconnect with her after you were disfellowshipped, or did it take some time to repair the relationship?
It took quite a while. So I actually spoke to her for the first time in 14 years as I was driving to the hospital for my daughter being born. Just said, this is your brother Nathan. I haven't spoken to you in a long time. I'm about to have a baby. If you'd like to be a part of our family, you're more than welcome to. And she came down to the hospital and was there for the birth of my daughter. We don't have much of a relationship right now, I'm sorry to say. And it's really, she's taken a lot of damage from our childhood. And it's really, in my opinion, she's been in 2 abusive marriages. She's filled with a lot of rage. She has a special needs daughter that's very difficult for her. And every time that I feel that I've tried to help, she lashes out at me and takes out her rage on me to the point where it's difficult to have a relationship with her. And that's just a symptom of being raised one of Jehovah's Witnesses with conditional love. Without that base of unconditional love, children are so afraid to go out into the world and actually try something, maybe fail at something, maybe succeed at something. At least they know that their family will always be there for them. As a witness kid, you don't have that. If you decided to get baptized at 9 years old, and then at 40, you just go, wow, what was I thinking at 9? Well, now you're dead to your family. So you either live a lie, or you go ahead and break off and start completely new all alone in your 40s or whenever you decide to leave. It does so much damage to people's psyche, and it's so difficult to repair. My brother, it's so funny the way that we all dealt with this, because we all essentially had the same childhood, a few years apart. My oldest sister just wanted to continue to toe the line, be a good witness. She married an elder in California and is just a good elder's wife, has an elder's son and daughter. My oldest brother, or my brother, he decided that no one was ever going to tell him what to do ever again, to his own detriment. You could tell him, I'll give you $1 million at 7 a.m., and he'd show up at 7:05 and say, give me my money. He'd say, well, no, I told you 7. Well, you don't get to tell me what to do, and I'll give you my money. It's just been so self-destructive his whole life. And my other sister, Lori, like I said, getting in abusive relationships, she just kind of searches these out and hasn't been able to kind of get past that. And me, I decided I was going to make something of myself. I'm not going to just do what I'm told. I'm going to become the man that I should have been, that I would have been able to if I wasn't pulled astray by this cult. And so I took everything that I had to become a fighter, to become a better father than I had, to do all these things, to become a better man. It's a tough journey. It's taken a lot of work, and I still work on it every single day. But it's much better than the alternative.
And what role, if any, have your parents had in your new family?
None. My father passed away in 2002 when I was 30. My mother's still alive. She lives down in California, very close to my good sister, the elder's wife. So she has someone to go to meetings with every week. My brother was in the hospital a year or two ago with liver failure. Looked like he might die. My mother drove up from California with my sister 7 or 8 hours to see my brother in the hospital. They were about 45 minutes from me and my daughter. Made no effort to forget about seeing me. They made no effort to see my daughter or contact. And when I'd heard my brother was in the hospital, I went down to see him, find out what was going on. And that's when he told me that my mother and my sister were up to visit him in the hospital. And when I got home, I kind of told the story to my wife, Monica, girlfriend at the time, and my daughter, Sierra. And I just kind of laughed about it. It's like, yep, that's just the way it is. You know, my mom and sister 45 minutes away, but because we're not good witnesses, they're not going to make any effort to see me or my daughter. And Sierra, it upset her. She didn't understand, well, why doesn't grandma want to see me? It just makes no sense, because they just want to be loved. And I've loved my daughter unconditionally. She's the first person in the family to actually get that. So she doesn't understand why grandma won't make the slightest effort to see her. My grandmother's seen my daughter maybe a dozen different times in 18 years. Just makes no effort whatsoever. I see my wife's family more every year than I've seen anyone in my blood family in the past 15 years, probably.
It's just so odd, isn't it? Because I also have a daughter who, and I part of the reason, in fact, the main reason why Deanna and I disassociated was to give her a chance, to give her freedom. We called her Jessica Liberty. We included freedom in her name so that she will always know what we did for her. And it's just so it seems so strange when you have a child. You look at the love that you have for your child and the fact that you would do absolutely anything for them. And then you think, well, how did my dad lose that love? Or in your case, how did my mother lose that love? Where did it go? Because there's no way I'm ever going to lose this feeling that I have for them and this impulse to do everything I can to make their life as good as possible.
Yeah, I've had arguments with my brother about unconditional love. He doesn't believe in it. He's never seen it. He said that, well, if his daughter or his son did something that just like completely cut them off, he doesn't believe in unconditional love. And he'll quote out, well, what if my daughter was some mass murderer doing these horrific things? And I go, well, first off, that's not going to happen. And secondly, it's not going to happen. So there's no reason not to extend just this unconditional love. But when you've never seen it, you don't understand it. And I have a very hard time with that myself. I understand that my daughter loves me unconditionally, but honestly, there are times when I have a hard time even understanding that. My relationship with my parents was, even at the best of times, was bad. I was terrified of my parents, not just from the emotional abuse, but the physical abuse as well. So my father would reach for something and I would cover up. We got hit that often. So once I hit, as young as 8 years old, I wanted to be as invisible as possible in the household, so I would get as little of that drama directed my way. My sister Lori, the one that's 6 years older than me, actually said one time how much easier I had it than she had. And I said, yeah, that's probably true that I didn't get as many beatings as you did, but that's also because I hid out. I wasn't antagonistic of them when I was a kid. I did as much as I could to stay hidden, to stay out of their eyesight, so I wouldn't catch that grief.
I can remember myself getting punished. Obviously, witnesses have the scripture, if you spare the rod, you'll spoil the child. I understand they've kind of watered down their stance on that in recent years, but nevertheless, people of our generation can remember being beaten. I don't think I had it as bad as other children did, or indeed you had it. But what's astonishing to me is that you are raised with this. You're told all the time, I'm doing this because I love you. I'm hurting you even though it hurts me because I want you to turn out as a good person. And granted, my daughter's only 4 years old, but a lot of people comment on how well behaved she is. We've never ever had to raise a hand to her. And I find it astonishing that for so many years and for so many generations, that has been the line, that if you spare the rod, you'll spoil the child. And in your case, at least, it seems to have had really disastrous consequences.
Well, and so when my daughter was born, my goal then was to raise her with love and respect. And from the very first day that she was born, I said, I'm going to tell you I love you every single day. And it was difficult. At the very beginning, me holding this baby and sitting there going, I love you. I love you. It was so hard for me to even say those words. But as time went along, she started saying them back to me. And we got to have this love reciprocated from one to another. And then teaching her respect as well. Then you don't need to beat someone to keep them in line. No. I can look at her. She knows when she's done something she's not supposed to. Yeah. I don't have to raise a hand to her. I just look at her. Yeah. And she's, oh, God, Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. But again, she doesn't live in fear. Yeah. Because she knows that she has my unconditional love. She just wants to make sure she doesn't disappoint me, that she doesn't. And what I've told her since she was old enough to understand, I will never punish you for mistakes. Those are learning opportunities. I will punish you when you willingly take a choice, a pathway of action that you know is wrong. If you lie to me, you know that lying is wrong. You will be punished for that. And raising her with those kinds of morals, the difference between right and wrong, not arbitrary rules, then she gets to understand. And there was even a scripture, something like, parents, don't be burdening your children. with all these little things. Well, now she has value because we celebrate her birthday. She has a day just for her every single year. She gets this unconditional love. It's the childhood that I wish I could have had, but since I couldn't have it, I get to give it to her. And that's what makes all the difference to me. And I've said this many times. I am the trunk of my family tree. Everything comes from me and the choice of life that I have made. My daughter's children, their children, they'll all look back on me, on my generation, the decisions that I made to make sure that we didn't stay in a cult any longer than we had to. And we could go and make our mark in the world.
Indeed. I'm sure she's appreciative, especially when she sees examples of shunning for herself. I'm sure she's very appreciative for the decision you made. I'd like you to talk a little bit about Robert, if that's okay. Your friend Robert Follis, who you mentioned briefly before. I know from the last time we met that Robert's story had quite a tragic ending, and it ended tragically fairly recently. Are you able to tell us what happened to Robert?
Yeah, so Robert and I became best friends. He was my coach. He fought himself 3 times. He didn't really have a heart for fighting, whereas that was my thing. I was able to get all of my rage and put that to work for me in the ring. He took our kind of shared childhood and turned that into becoming a coach, wanting to give back. But at the same time, the damage that was done from his childhood, it didn't matter how many of his students or athletes would tell him, Coach Robert, we love you. Thank you so much for everything you've done. He never felt worthy of that love. And those that should have been giving him the unconditional love, his parents never did. And Robert was born, same as me, with 3 siblings. Robert's brother Randy committed suicide a few years ago. And he was an elder in a Spanish-speaking congregation. And they found in his notebook, his journal, that he didn't believe the witnesses at all. But now in his 40s, I think maybe close to 50 or so, he had nothing else in the world to turn to. And just so tired of living this lie, he took his own life. And he said, well, hopefully this will bring my family back together. And it did. For a week or so, the mom and dad, Robert, his brother Rick, their sister Sharon, all got together, went to the Oregon coast, spent some time together. And then at the end of their weekend, their father said, well, we don't think we should do this anymore until you all decide to come back and join Jehovah's Witnesses again. And that was it for Robert. He just said, well, that's just not going to happen. And so then he himself committed suicide back in December. And Robert and I had a falling out for a while. We had an argument, as best friends do, but we were actually on the mend and coming back together. And so when he took his own life, it was devastating for me. And I wanted to make sure that his suicide didn't go unnoticed. I wanted everyone to know what directly led to this. And so I spoke at his memorial in Portland. They also had a memorial for him in Las Vegas. And I shared what it's like to be raised a Jehovah's Witness, what it's like to be raised without unconditional love, to where every single day you wake up wondering, do my parents still love me? What if I do something and get disfellowshipped or get disowned from the organization? Well, what then? I'll be cast out into the world. It's just a horrific thing to live with.
Well, I'm really grateful to you for sharing his story, because I heard it, as I say, the last time we were together, and it's such a tragic story. And I think that the whole issue of suicide and the way that shunning impacts on people to that extent is very underreported, and not nearly enough attention is given to it. That, the psychological impact that shunning can have, and the way it can make people take their lives, as it did do with Robert. And when you hear the story in more detail, you realize, no, I'm sorry, this was to do with the whole shunning thing. So thank you for sharing his story, and thank you for sharing your story as well. It's been very illuminating.
Well, I'd like to say that maybe it's self-aggrandizing, but I consider myself apostate number one. As every time you hear about an ex-Jehovah's Witness, if you're a witness and you hear about someone leaving the truth, they always say, well, they're living a horrible life right now. No one really loves them. They don't have any real friends. Oh, they're not even with their family. They're surrounded by the world. Satan has just corrupted them. And here I am saying very, very loudly, much louder than I ever spoke going door to door, I never imagined my life could be this great. And it was all because I found the strength to leave an organization where I was just miserable, where I just hated my life, where things started to make less and less sense. And by getting out and by really, when you join an organization like Jehovah's Witnesses, you instantly have a community. You know what you're doing 2 or 3 days a week. You have a whole bunch of like-minded people to associate with. When you're out on your own, you have to actively go out and search for people that share your interests with you. If you don't, then you just sit at home alone day after day. And I don't care what it is, whether you just like reading books, any kind of sports, you're a Harry Potter fan, whatever it may be. There are millions of people out there that enjoy that as well, that you can have a relationship with, you can create friends with. It's not going to be easy. And especially being raised a Jehovah's Witness too, you're so naive when you look out into the world. You don't understand that, yeah, there are people that you have to question, which is kind of funny because witness businesses are some of the shadiest around. They view the upcoming young brothers in the congregation essentially as their slave labor to work for them. So you think we would learn that, but that's God's will, so it's okay. But by getting out and really finding your own way, making your own pathway, and for me, it was mixed martial arts. To this day, I still have relationships with people that I started training with 20 years ago. People that want to see me be successful, that they're more concerned about me as a moral person, as a good father, than whether or not I want to celebrate my birthday, whether or not I went to see an R-rated movie, whether or not I realize that most of Christmas is based on pagan religions. Your average people don't care about those things. They want to associate with like-minded people that maybe challenge them, that are thinking about philosophy or thinking about other interests, enjoy sports, all of these things. And your life is so short. You have to get out and make your own way. And it's sad for me to see people that leave Witnesses that then immediately go into some other organized religion, that they, without being told what to do and who they should be, they get completely lost. You need to figure that out for yourself. Otherwise, people will just continue to tell you who you are. And I saw that with Robert Follis. Whatever book he was reading, he almost kind of absorbed that type of a personality because he was still kind of searching for himself. And it just takes time. And I think non-Jehovah's Witnesses, I think a lot of times they don't really appreciate how great having their family with them is. Because when you're out there all alone, when you've lost your family, you've lost all these friends, it's a difficult life. Oh, and there's been moments where I've had surgeries, like literal surgeries, and had no one there to take care of me afterwards. So the hospital would just drop me off at a hotel, and I would just hang out there for a few days until I was good enough to drive home. It can be tough out there. But here I am 20 plus years after leaving, and I've got an incredible wife. I've got an incredible loving daughter. I've got friends. I'm living so far beyond anything that I ever dreamed. But it makes me wish I would have set my sights a little bit higher. Because once you get out there and you put in the effort, life really is worth living. And you don't need to be told how to behave, what's acceptable. It's so funny. My daughter's mother's side of the family, she's back being a witness. So that whole side of the family is all witnesses. And she has an uncle over there who's disfellowshipped, mind you. But he always preaches to her about how she needs to become a Jehovah's Witness because, what does this world have for her? And I'm looking at Sierra saying, oh, your uncle on your mother's side told you this, huh? The guy with 5 kids from 3 women, who's abusive, who does drugs, who's disfellowshipped. He says that you need to be told what's right and wrong, huh? No, we don't need that. He needs that. We know what's right and wrong. We know how to do the moral thing. We don't need to go sit for 3 nights a week to be told, not to be rude, not to be hurtful, not to steal, lie, cheat. Well, those are things that we can already grasp that. We don't need to be threatened with everlasting death to do the right thing. We do the right thing simply because it's right. And when I pass, I would just like people to say, you know what, he was okay. He did the best he could. He made some mistakes, but overall, not too bad of a dude.
Well, hopefully you're not going to pass anytime soon. Although you've certainly been through enough situations where you could well have passed very soon, the amount of beatings you've taken. But I'm just, before we go, if your family, if your Jehovah's Witness family ends up watching this video at any point, what message would you have for them?
Well, so when my father died, it was 2002. I was 30 years old. I quit my job in construction. I decided I was going to make a go at becoming a fighter and see how far I could take it. Because it was a family emergency, my mother and father contacted me, told me that my father was dying. In November of that year, I went and I spent the last 3 weeks with them, helping my father prepare for his passing. And he died, his bone marrow quit producing red blood cells. So he basically suffocated over a period of a few months, always out of breath. When I first got there, he could stand and walk around. And then when he would stand up, he would pass out because there wasn't enough oxygen to fuel his brain as well as his muscles. This
is probably an obvious question, but did he refuse blood?
Oh, of course, yes. Yeah. So in the last week or so of his life, my oldest sister, Vicky, married to the elder, came to be with them and help out as well. Now, I hadn't seen her in, I'm sure, well over 10, 12 years, something like that. And I walk into my parents' house and see her sitting at the breakfast table reading the newspaper. And I just smiled and said, "Hey, Vicky, how you doing?" And she put down her paper and looked at me and said, "Hello, Nathan." And then went back to reading, making as minimal interaction with me as allowed according to the witness beliefs. So I went in and I saw my father, and he said, "Oh, did you see Vicky?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, how did she treat you?" And I said, "Well, as you would expect." And for the first time ever, he looked at me and he said, "Well, maybe her eyes will be open before it's too late, and she'll realize the importance of family before it's too late, like it is with me." And then he was dead a week or so after that. And so if they did want to hear any of this and kind of examine their life and how they're living it, I would just kind of tell them to reflect on my father, not his last words, but close to his last words. And I've made so many decisions throughout my life based on that in the past 14 years. Is this 16 years? I live in Oregon. I shouldn't live in Oregon. I should live in California. I should be around the Hollywood area. I had a lot of opportunities for shows to work on. I had a show on Spike TV, on G4, a bunch of things. I had my own show down in California, but I'd always have to fly down there. So many more opportunities for me to work down in California. But every time those opportunities came up, I would ask myself, on my deathbed, who's going to be there? How is this going to reflect on my life in 40, 50, 60 years? Am I going to think about how great it was having my own TV show and months away from my daughter? Is she going to appreciate that? And so over and over again, I made the decision to think about my family first. And we're fine. We have food money. We have a nice house. We're okay. Could have been a lot more lucrative down in California, but I also would have had to leave my daughter. And that trade wasn't worth it. I can't imagine anything that I would trade my daughter for, spending time with her, getting to see her in the morning when she went off to school, be here when she gets home from school. It's just amazing to me that anyone would choose any organization over their own children, their own flesh and blood. And for my brother and my sister who are not Jehovah's Witnesses, I would just say, treat me with respect, be kind. I understand that you're angry about a lot of things. I'm not the cause of that. Don't take it out on me. And I live very much by the credo of, if I wouldn't tolerate treatment from a stranger that my family is trying to give me, why would I tolerate it from them? You're supposed to treat me better than a stranger. So I do have my standards for how I'm going to be treated. And especially with my mother and my sister that's the witness, you raised me with conditional love. So here's my condition. You love me unconditionally. Otherwise, stay out of my life. Because I don't have any room for that. For someone who claims to love me, but then won't associate with me or my daughter because we don't want to be in the same club that you are, I'm better off without you. And that sucks for you because I'm pretty awesome. You're much worse off without me than I am without you. Because I'm happy. And I have a good life. And a happy life. And it's only getting better. And I'm sure that me and my new wife are going to have more children as well. And you're going to miss out on that. All because we don't want to be a part of your secret club. So that's too bad for you. But we'll be fine. I'm the trunk. I'm the trunk of my family tree.
Well said. Well said, Nathan. Well, it's absolutely delightful to speak to you, and even more delightful to see how happy you are and how fulfilled you are. And thank you for sharing that with my viewers.
Well, thank you for having me here. I've been really admiring the things that you've been doing, how outspoken you've been. I did want to mention I wore this shirt specifically for today.
Do you want to stand up and show us?
This is my brand, Zombie Cage Fighter.
Okay, brilliant.
It's a biographical horror story based on my life. I took my adventures as a fighter, as a father, and then I threw in zombies. And then I wore specifically a tank top, not to just show off the guns, but to show off the tattoos. And this on my right sleeve is a phoenix because I feel like I had to be reborn several times throughout my life. I had to leave behind, I had to die to what I was raised with to be born again in a new way. And then on the left shoulder, Japanese kanji for rock, and fortitude I invincimus. By endurance we conquer. And I also wanted to show that not everyone with tattoos is really scary and biker gang rude or something. So especially if you're trying to leave the witnesses, it's not as scary out there as you've been told. Just go in with your eyes open, try to educate yourself, read, do a lot of reading, join some clubs, some groups, join a gym, not just a 24-hour fitness, but something like kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, anything like that where you have to interact with people, because you really you can't just leave an organization and leave that space empty. You have to find something to replace it with, some new activity, some new friends, some people to interact with. I saw my baby mama when I said, no, I'm never going back, and she got reinstated, was because that was all she had. She didn't have any friends outside of the organization. All she had was her family. And for me, I was able to not replace a mother and siblings, but now with my wife and her family, now I do have a new family, and they'll be a part of mine moving forward. And it's really incredible to see the unconditional love that is supposed to go on in a family. They're being displayed regularly.
Sure. Well, viewers, if you can, please check out Zombie Cage Fighter. Is there a link that I can put for my viewers?
.com.
Brilliant. I'll put the link in the description anyway so that people can check that out. But once again, Nathan, thank you so much for joining me.
I've enjoyed it, and you can call on me anytime. Nice. I enjoy these conversations. I really like this. We can talk about anything that you've discovered, any philosophy you want to talk about. I'm all for it.
Fantastic. So don't be surprised if you see Nathan on the channel again, but this is all we've got time for on this occasion. Viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. Please don't forget to subscribe for more interviews, and as always, thank you for watching.